What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about progression and how progression works in MLB The Show 21 and MLB The Show in general. Maybe get into some of the finer points, some of the things that are more of speculation as opposed to just the hard and fast facts about it. We will cover the facts to start off the video, but definitely want to get into some conversation points surrounding development and progression in MLB The Show, because there's been a lot of comments on my videos lately, and I want to address them and at least let you guys know, that I am, trying to figure the topic out myself to make sure that you guys have all of the best information when it comes to progression and development with your players in MLB The Show. So let's go ahead and jump into the basics of progression in MLB The Show. The first thing that you guys have to know with progression and development in MLB The Show is that it works differently than a lot of other sports games. So whenever you go to a player's attributes, they're going to have an actual potential rating. So on their player card, you're going to see that a player has A, B, C, D potential, and so that's kind of similar to other games where, like Madden, for example, you have quick, or rather star, superstar, X factor, and those varying degrees of development kind of affect how quickly a player develops. Well, within those types of ranges, you also have a specific number for every single player within MLB The Show. So Marco Luciano, for example, whenever we went into him and took a look at, editing the player, you can see that he has a development potential of 97, which essentially what that means, to break that down, is that's the player's max overall. And the important thing to note in conjunction with the potential number is that their potential can increase and decrease. Now, generally, you're not going to see a huge fluctuation. You're not going to see a guy go from, 70 potential to 97 potential within one season. Now, if they play really well and they play really well over a couple of seasons, you can see their progression, their potential start to rise, and you can see a player's potential go from C to B or B to A. And that can help a player's prospects out, for his future. And so that is a positive thing with the development system and progression system and potential system here in MLB The Show, is that it is more fluid than most other games, in the sports world. However, the thing to note in addition to that is that just because a player has 97 potential does not mean that they're always going to be a 97 overall. They may never reach a 97 overall, because if they play poorly, they probably aren't going to reach that. And the other thing to factor in with that is a lot of older players that aren't nearly the overall that their development is, have a higher potential to keep them around longer. So, you could talk about some of the older players in the game, like a Buster Posey is a perfect example here. He's a player that has A potential. Well, he's not going to be getting up to an A development anytime soon. He's probably not going to be up to a 91 overall, even if he plays really well. I mean, he is playing pretty well as is, but they give him that A potential to keep him around longer, because if he had B potential, something more similar to his actual overall, then he's probably going to regress faster and he's going to retire faster. So that's a key point there, is that having a higher potential prevents you from regressing as quickly and prevents you from retiring. It helps a player stick around for longer. And so those A potentials, B potentials are really important for older players that you want to stick around, because once you hit the age of 30 in MLB The Show, you do start to tend to lose some attributes and stuff like that, even if you play well. So it's definitely something that you have to know as a key point there in terms of that potential number. However, we then have to get into what affects whether you can reach that potential number or not. What affects how quickly a player can develop. Well, the first note here that I want to talk about is that if you have A potential, you're going to develop at a faster pace than B potential. If you have B potential, you're going to develop generally at a faster pace than a C potential. And so a good example of this, and this will lead into some points later on, is Marco Luciano. So he's not playing all that well right now, only batting .214. He was down in Double-A at one point, batting pretty well down there, but he's not playing like lights out or anything. Nothing that would say this guy should be progressing really well. However, he's getting really, really good progression across the board. And a lot of that can be attributed solely to the fact that he is an A potential player. And so while he's an A potential player, you might have a guy that's a B potential player that's playing better than he is, that's not getting the same level of progression, like a Will Wilson right here. There are various other players that I could point out as well, but that's a good comparison right there. So the difference between A potential is that you are a surefire prospect. You're somebody that is expected to be great, and so the game is going to try to get you there. Whereas if you're a B potential player, you're expected to be good, but you're not guaranteed to be good, and so the game's not going to necessarily get you there. You have to perform to get there yourself. And if you're a C potential, then it's all the worse for you. You really have to play well consistently to get yourself up to that point where you could potentially be good. So that brings us to my next point, and which is, probably the most important point that I've talked about a lot of times within, MLB videos and tips and tricks videos, and that is that your playing time and your performance are the single most important factor to a player's development. And that's not the only factor. That's incredibly important to understand, but they are the most important factor to a player's development. So, if you have a guy at the AAA level that isn't getting playing time, they're not going to develop as quickly as a guy that is getting playing time. So even if Marco Luciano was at AAA as an A potential guy and he wasn't playing at all, he would not be developing as quickly as he is right now. So you have to make sure that guys within your farm system have starting reps. You have to make sure that the guys that you want to develop are getting the reps necessary to be able to develop. Now, their performance, again, factors into that. So if they're getting the starting reps and they are playing really well, they're generally going to develop faster. If they're getting the starting reps and they're not playing really well, then they're going to develop a little bit slower than that. But if they're not getting starting reps at all, then they're probably not going to develop at all in comparison to those first two that I mentioned. And so that's where you can maybe take a look at, for example, your Class A roster, where you may, inevitably have like a B potential player or something like that, and they're going to get some level of development on their own. Now Jared Prado here is a guy that I think I've had in AA at a couple of different points during the season, so that's why you're seeing quite a bit of development from him. But you can have young players here in the minor leagues, that if they're not getting playing time, they're not going to realize their potential. And so Nolan McMillan here, for whatever reason, his potential is going up. We can look at some other guys here. William Gelman, he's kind of getting some development, but getting some negative attributes and stuff like that. Brian Marquez getting some positives, getting some negatives, mixed results. That's a good look at players that are, sitting and not getting playing time. So they may be getting development that is just forced to them through the game because it's trying to get them to that potential where their max overall is said to be. But at the same time, they're not getting the performance and the playing time to back that up, and so they're not maxing out on their development. So, that's another key point there. And essentially what that brings me to is a really good comment here by Rob Trenton, that is just one of many that I've gotten, talking about, him trying to grasp the progression system and understand, what exactly is going on. A lot of people, I think, understand what's happening in terms of progression. You want playing time, you want good performance, that's going to drive progression. But then you're going to have times where you have a guy that's performing really well that's not progressing, as well as a guy that's performing worse than them. Maybe they have similar to the same development, potentials. Maybe they're both like high 90s or something like that. He kind of goes into a similar situation there, and we can look at some of that type of thing here on this roster that I have, with the Giants. There are various players that, even though they're not playing that well, are developing really well. So Marco Luciano is developing probably better than anybody on my team with a 97 potential, but he's not really playing that well. 214 average right now, and that's not necessarily the best in the world. Whereas I have a guy like Ramos who is not necessarily developing quite as fast as him, but has a better batting average. Might be playing a little bit better than he is. We have various other A potential guys. So Lamont Wade Jr. Is actually playing really, really well up here in the MLB level, and he's not really developing still at the same rate that Luciano is developing. So there are, again, more factors to point out here. So a player's age. is another factor that's going to factor into it. So a player that is younger is generally speaking going to develop faster. So if you compare a 21-year-old a potential player to a 19-year-old a potential player, the 19-year-old is generally going to develop faster. Now that's not always the case, because sometimes we've seen it with first year prospects. Like, you draft a guy and they don't necessarily develop as quickly as you would like them to, even if they have really good potential. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but generally speaking, you're going to see better development with the younger players. And so even if you have an older player like a Lamont Wade Jr. that's playing really well, chances are good that he's not really going to develop at the same rate as those guys that are younger than him, because a lot of his developmental years are already gone at that point. Now, Lamont Wade Jr. is a guy that I had in AAA, played really well in AAA. He's now up at the MLB level, playing really well at the MLB level, and he's still not quite developing at that same rate. So I think I can attribute most of that to his age, but that's not definitive. And this is where we start to get into some of the gray areas and conversation areas that people like to talk about. And that is, let's say you had very similar players, like I talked about Ramos, and, we talked about Luciano and stuff like that. Just because they play well and just because they get all the playing time does not necessarily guarantee that they're going to progress at a certain rate. There is, in my estimation and my understanding, still a semblance of randomness to how these players progress. And I think this really gets down to answering the question that a lot of people have, when it comes down to it at the end of the day. So you're doing everything right. You're playing your players, you're getting them playing time, they're playing well, but they're not progressing as fast as other players, or they're not, progressing as well as you would like. Well, inevitably what's going on there is there still is some element of randomness to it. And outside of the element of randomness that is potentially going on there, you also have to consider that these games are coded. And so there is probably something going on behind the scenes that says, okay, this team has like 6 or 7 A potential guys. We can't have every single A potential guy shooting up the system, as quickly as each other are. We can't have everybody skyrocket to the MLB right away. So maybe they have something in place where only 2 or 3 guys are allowed to have that maximum level of progression that you're seeing out of a guy like Marco Luciano. That's speculation, but it is something that certainly could factor into the game, because I've talked about before how if you have a guy sitting behind other players, or you have a guy kind of log jammed at a position, or maybe he's a super high overall for AAA, he kind of stops developing and stuff like that. There are factors in the game that are kind of benchmarks or brackets that will affect a player's ability to develop or potential to not develop. And so I don't personally have all the answers there. I haven't been able to find all of the exact answers there, but it is absolutely worth discussing some of those topics to try to get to the bottom of what's going on there. Ultimately, though, what I have to tell you is, if you are doing the basics right, if you are getting your guys playing time, if they're playing well, you're trying to force them to develop and get them into good situations, put them with good players around them so their team is succeeding and things like that. You're giving yourself the best chance at having your players succeed, but it's not a guarantee. And I think that is appropriate for a baseball game, because just because a player has really good stats in AA doesn't mean that they're going to succeed in AAA. And just because a player has really good stats in AA and AAA doesn't mean that they're going to succeed at the MLB level. So I like that little bit of randomness that is potentially added in there, because that prevents all of your guys from being surefire locks to be whatever their development says they're going to be. If we didn't have any element of randomness there, then there's the potential that what's going to end up happening is, everybody gets to that 97 overall that their potential is supposed to be. I hope that this video does help you guys out, at least with the general understanding of progression, potential, development, and all that good stuff here in MLB The Show. We've covered everything that is known to us, and I just want to put it out there that if more information comes to light, or I do some digging and I uncover some more information about the rest of what we talked about, I will absolutely bring it to you guys. the beginning half of what we talked about is absolutely fact. We know those things to be true, and in comparison to the things at the end of this video that are a bit more speculative, if anything more definitive comes out on that, I'll update you guys. But hopefully this video did help you out, or at least let you know that I'm looking at these things and trying to figure them out for you. With all that being said, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Hope you guys have a good night.